The white stallion's scream of rage shattered the crystal calm of Whitmore Elite Equestrian Auction like a gunshot through silk, sending champagne glasses crashing to marble floors as the most exclusive gathering of the season erupted into chaos no amount of money could contain. Ivory Prince reared 18 hands of pure fury against his restraints, his snow-white coat gleaming with perspiration and terror as he lashed out at anything within reach of his powerful hooves. The sound that escaped his throat wasn't the gentle whinny of domesticated beauty, but something primal and wild, a cry that spoke of trauma buried beneath layers of careful breeding and forced compliance. Marcus Whitmore watched his family's reputation crumble in real time as security personnel scrambled to contain the magnificent beast whose bloodline traced back to European royalty, but whose behavior belonged to something untamed and dangerous. The carefully orchestrated atmosphere of refined sophistication dissolved into barely controlled panic as women in designer gowns pressed themselves against mahogany walls while their companions debated whether to flee or remain for the spectacle. Crystal chandeliers swayed overhead from the vibrations of Ivory Prince's assault on his reinforced stall, their rainbow prisms now casting fractured light across a scene that had transformed from elegant commerce into something approaching warfare. The stallion's eyes rolled white with terror and fury, his massive frame throwing itself against barriers designed to contain animals far less powerful than his magnificent form. Each impact sent shudders through the auction house's foundation, rattling brass fixtures and causing priceless Persian rugs to shift beneath the feet of bidders who had never encountered anything their wealth couldn't control or purchase. 3 stable hands struggled to maintain their grip on lead ropes that cut deep into their palms, their faces ashen with the knowledge that they were seconds away from losing control of 1,000 pounds of enraged horseflesh. Marcus's silver hair had lost its perfect styling as sweat beaded across his forehead, his custom-tailored suit suddenly feeling constricting as he faced the nightmare scenario of his most prestigious auction becoming a public disaster. The assembled elite found themselves confronted with raw power that their combined fortunes couldn't tame, couldn't predict, couldn't understand. Oil executives and European royalty alike backed toward exits as Ivory Prince's fury intensified, his white coat now dark with sweat and his breathing labored with exertion that spoke of desperation rather than mere defiance. The auction house that moments ago had gleamed with old money elegance now resembled a battlefield where the enemy was beauty itself turned savage, where generations of careful breeding had produced not docility but something wild and untouchable. Emergency protocols activated as staff members moved to evacuate the most valuable guests, their practiced efficiency barely containing the spreading panic that threatened to transform organized retreat into stampede. Yet even as chaos reigned supreme, Ivory Prince continued his assault on captivity, his magnificent form becoming a living symbol of everything that money couldn't buy, couldn't control, couldn't break into submission. The white stallion, who would soon bring an empire to its knees, stood motionless in the center ring, his presence commanding attention with the silent authority of something born to rule rather than be ruled. Ivory Prince carried himself with bearing that spoke of bloodlines stretching back through centuries of careful breeding, his lineage tracing paths through European royal stables and Arabian desert legends where horses were revered as living treasures. His coat caught and held every source of illumination in the auction house, reflecting light with the luminous quality of fresh snow beneath winter sunshine, each hair seeming to capture and transform the crystal chandelier's glow into something approaching celestial radiance. The stallion's massive frame stood 18 hands of perfectly sculpted power, muscles rippling beneath pristine white hair, with each subtle shift of weight that demonstrated the athletic grace bred into his very bones. His neck arched with classical elegance, while his dark eyes surveyed the gathered crowd with intelligence that seemed to assess each potential bidder with the calculating gaze of one accustomed to being coveted rather than owned. The whispers that circulated through the distinguished assembly carried numbers that transformed him from mere animal into living symbol of ultimate luxury, his estimated value reaching well into 7 figures and making him not just the evening star but a breathing embodiment of prestige that money could barely quantify. Marcus watched with proprietary pride as the assembled elite examined Ivory Prince with the practiced eyes of those accustomed to acquiring whatever caught their fancy, their gazes calculating not just monetary worth, but the social currency that came with owning something so magnificent. Oil executives leaned forward in their seats, while European collectors murmured appreciatively about bloodlines they recognized from their own family histories. Their combined attention focused on the stallion with intensity that transformed mere commerce into something approaching worship. Yet beneath the surface of Ivory Prince's composed exterior, something flickered in his dark eyes that the crowd interpreted as regal aloofness, but carried undertones of wariness that spoke of experiences beyond their understanding. His breathing remained controlled, his posture perfect, but those with experience reading equine behavior might have noticed the almost imperceptible tension in his jaw, the way his ears flicked back and forth with frequency that suggested alertness bordering on anxiety. The pristine grooming that made his coat gleam like polished marble couldn't quite hide the network of subtle scars along his neck and shoulders, marks so faint they appeared as shadows rather than evidence of whatever had shaped his past. The auction house itself seemed to hold its breath as Ivory Prince stood in patient stillness, his magnificent form becoming the focal point around which all the evening's energy revolved. He represented more than bloodlines or breeding potential to the gathered elite. He embodied their ability to possess beauty itself, to transform living legend into personal property through the simple application of superior financial resources. None suspected that within minutes, all their combined wealth would prove powerless against forces already stirring beneath the stallion's composed exterior. The moment when everything would unravel had already been set in motion. Though the wealthy bidders, positioning themselves around the auction floor, remained blissfully unaware that their carefully orchestrated evening would soon become something beyond their control or comprehension. Marcus Whitmore stepped to the podium with the practiced confidence of a man whose family had conducted such transactions for 3 generations, his silver hair catching the light as he surveyed the assembled elite with satisfaction born of decades managing their desires and competition. The air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation as paddle numbers emerged from designer handbags and tailored jacket pockets, each numbered placard representing fortunes most people couldn't imagine, and egos that demanded satisfaction regardless of cost. Preliminary assessments whispered between potential buyers carried the weight of serious calculation, oil executives murmuring to their advisors, while European collectors exchanged knowing glances about bloodlines they recognized from their own family histories. The atmosphere transformed from social gathering to battlefield as strategic positions were claimed around the auction floor, each bidder calculating not just monetary investment, but the social currency that would come with owning something so magnificent. Technology moguls studied their research tablets while banking heiresses adjusted their jewelry with the nervous energy of those preparing for combat, disguised as commerce. Ivory Prince stood motionless in the center ring, his white coat luminous under the carefully positioned spotlights that made him appear almost ethereal against the rich mahogany backdrop. His bearing remained proud, yet strangely detached, as if he observed the human drama unfolding around him with ancient wisdom that transcended their material obsessions. The stallion's dark eyes moved slowly across the gathered crowd, his gaze seeming to assess each potential owner with intelligence that made some bidders shift uncomfortably in their seats, though none could articulate why his attention felt more like judgment than mere animal awareness. Security personnel positioned themselves strategically throughout the auction house, their presence a subtle reminder of the serious money about to change hands and the valuable asset requiring protection. These weren't ordinary guards, but specialists trained in handling both priceless livestock and the eccentric wealthy who collected them, their watchful eyes scanning for any sign of disruption that might threaten either the horse or the distinguished crowd. The insurance alone on tonight's transaction would exceed most people's lifetime earnings, making every precaution necessary to protect investments that represented more than money to those bidding. Marcus adjusted his silk tie and cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the murmured conversations as all attention focused on the podium where fortunes would soon be won and lost. The stage had been meticulously set for what should have been a routine if expensive transaction among the privileged few, each element choreographed to maximize both drama and profit from an audience accustomed to getting whatever they desired through superior financial resources. Yet something in Ivory Prince's stillness carried an undertone of tension that experienced horsemen might have recognized as warning, though the excited bidders remained focused entirely on the competition ahead, rather than the subtle signs that their carefully planned evening was about to take an unexpected turn. The disaster waiting to unfold began with something so subtle that only the most experienced eyes could have detected the warning signs gathering like storm clouds on a clear horizon, though the wealthy bidders remained focused entirely on their competition rather than the magnificent creature whose distress would soon shatter their carefully orchestrated evening. Ivory Prince's breathing developed an almost imperceptible irregularity, his powerful chest expanding and contracting in rhythms that deviated just enough from normal to catch the attention of those who understood equine physiology better than auction dynamics. His ears began a restless dance of movement, flicking back and forth with increasing frequency that spoke of internal tension building beyond what even the most spirited stallion should experience during routine handling. A fine sheen of perspiration appeared along his powerful neck, despite the carefully controlled climate that kept the auction house at perfect temperature for both human comfort and animal well-being. The moisture caught the light from crystal chandeliers, creating an almost ethereal glow that the gathered bidders interpreted as evidence of his magnificent breeding rather than warning signs of physiological distress. His nostrils flared wider with each breath, drawing in air with the deliberate effort of someone fighting against invisible constraints that grew tighter with each passing moment. Dr. Elizabeth Hartman, the attending veterinarian whose reputation for equine care had earned her exclusive contracts with the world's most prestigious stables, moved closer to the center ring with growing concern etched across her weathered features. Her trained eye cataloged symptoms that the excited crowd missed entirely, her professional assessment revealing elevated heart rate and muscle tension that suggested something far beyond normal auction stress was affecting the magnificent animal. Years of experience reading equine distress signals sent alarm bells through her consciousness as she observed subtle tremors along his flanks and the way his weight shifted almost imperceptibly from foot to foot. Marcus continued his practiced routine from the podium, his voice carrying the polished authority of 3 generations of successful auctioneering. Though experienced horsemen scattered throughout the crowd began exchanging worried glances as they recognized early warning signs that their less knowledgeable companions dismissed as spirited behavior. Old-timers who had spent decades around premium bloodstock leaned forward in their seats, their competitive excitement replaced by professional concern as they watched Ivory Prince's condition deteriorate in ways that money couldn't prevent or control. The stallion's dark eyes, which moments ago had surveyed the crowd with regal composure, now carried something approaching desperation as whatever force was building within his magnificent frame began to overwhelm his ability to maintain the dignified bearing that had made him the evening star attraction. His white coat, still luminous under the spotlights, began to darken with perspiration that spoke of internal struggle rather than external exertion, while his breathing became more labored despite the absence of any physical demands being placed upon him. The transformation was subtle but undeniable to those who knew how to read the language of equine distress, though the majority of bidders remained oblivious to the crisis building before their very eyes. The moment when wealth and power would prove utterly meaningless arrived without warning, as Ivory Prince's magnificent frame suddenly swayed like a tree in hurricane winds, his powerful legs trembling beneath him with violent tremors that sent shockwaves of terror through every witness present. His 18 hands of pure breeding and generations of careful bloodline cultivation became nothing more than a suffering creature whose distress transformed the glittering auction house into something approaching a medical battlefield. Foam appeared at the corners of his mouth, white against his snow-colored muzzle, while his breathing became labored gasps that echoed through the suddenly silent hall like death rattles in a cathedral. The distinguished crowd that moments ago had whispered 7-figure bids now pressed themselves against mahogany walls as panic rippled through their ranks with the speed of wildfire through dry grass. Women in designer gowns clutched their pearls while their companions debated whether to flee or remain, their carefully cultivated composure cracking like fine china under pressure they had never been trained to handle. The elegant atmosphere of refined competition dissolved into barely controlled chaos as the reality struck them that all their combined fortunes could not stop what was unfolding before their horrified eyes. Dr. Hartman rushed forward with her emergency kit, her professional training overriding the shock that froze lesser mortals as she fought to reach the collapsing stallion through a crowd suddenly transformed from sophisticated bidders into panicked civilians. Her equipment scattered across the marble floor as she knelt beside Ivory Prince, whose majestic bearing had been replaced by obvious suffering that made even the most hardened businessman look away from what money could neither prevent nor cure. The veterinarian's hands moved with desperate efficiency, searching for vital signs, while the stallion's condition deteriorated with terrifying speed. Marcus gripped the podium with white knuckles as his authoritative voice cracked under the strain of maintaining order in a situation that had spiraled beyond any auctioneer's ability to control. His family's three-generation reputation hung in the balance as he watched their most prestigious evening transform into a public relations nightmare that would be whispered about in elite circles for decades to come. The crystal chandeliers continued to cast their rainbow prisms across a scene that had become anything but beautiful, their elegant light now illuminating suffering rather than luxury. Ivory Prince's struggles intensified as whatever force was claiming him gained strength, his powerful frame convulsing with spasms that sent ripples of horror through witnesses who had never seen anything their wealth couldn't fix or replace. The stallion's dark eyes, once intelligent and regal, now reflected confusion and pain that transcended species barriers, touching something primal in every human heart present. Security personnel moved to contain the crowd while maintaining clear pathways for medical intervention, their training inadequate for managing both panicked millionaires and a dying legend whose suffering had transformed their carefully controlled environment into chaos that money could neither understand nor prevent. The moment when everything beautiful became broken arrived like thunder in a crystal cathedral, as Ivory Prince's front legs buckled beneath him in slow-motion horror that would haunt the dreams of every witness for years to come. His magnificent frame fought against gravity with desperate courage, muscles straining to keep his powerful hindquarters upright, while his forelegs trembled and gave way like pillars crumbling under impossible weight. The sight of such noble strength, reduced to suffering, created a heart-wrenching display that silenced even the most hardened businessmen. Their usual calculations and competitive instincts rendered meaningless by raw vulnerability that transcended monetary value. The auction house erupted into controlled panic as the reality struck that they were witnessing something beyond their experience or ability to fix through traditional means. Security personnel moved with practiced efficiency to manage the crowd while creating clear pathways for medical intervention. Their training stretched to accommodate both panicked millionaires and a collapsing legend whose suffering had transformed their elegant venue into an emergency trauma center. The marble floors that moments ago had reflected crystal chandelier light now served as staging ground for desperate medical efforts that seemed pitifully inadequate against the magnitude of what was unfolding. Cell phones emerged from designer handbags and tailored pockets as concerned bidders contacted their own veterinarians for advice, their voices urgent with the helplessness of those accustomed to solving problems through superior resources, now facing something money couldn't touch. Others simply captured the unfolding drama with the detached curiosity of people who had spent lifetimes observing rather than participating in genuine crises, their cameras recording suffering with the clinical distance of those who experienced life through screens rather than emotional engagement. Marcus gripped the podium until his knuckles turned white as he faced the nightmare scenario every auctioneer dreaded, watching his family's three-generation reputation crumble in real time as their most prestigious event transformed into a public relations catastrophe that would echo through elite circles for decades. The Whitmore name, synonymous with excellence and exclusivity, now became associated with failure and tragedy as their carefully orchestrated evening dissolved into chaos that no amount of damage control could contain or repair. Dr. Hartman worked frantically around Ivory Prince's struggling form, her medical equipment spread across expensive marble floors, while she fought to stabilize vital signs that continued deteriorating despite her expertise. The stallion's labored breathing filled the auction house with sounds that spoke of suffering beyond physical pain, his dark eyes reflecting confusion and terror that touched something primal in every human heart present. His white coat, once luminous with health and breeding, now darkened with perspiration that spoke of internal battle against forces no veterinary training had prepared her to combat. The assembled elite found themselves confronted with mortality and helplessness in their sanctuary of wealth and privilege. their carefully constructed world of control and acquisition shattered by the sight of beauty dying before their eyes, while all their combined fortunes proved powerless to prevent or reverse what was claiming their evening star attraction. The salvation that would transform everything had already arrived unannounced, though it came not in the form of wealth or medical expertise, but as a woman whose simple presence carried something the panicked crowd had never encountered in their glittering world of acquisition and control. She appeared at the edge of the chaos, like morning mist materializing from shadow, her worn denim jacket and practical boots marking her as distinctly separate from the designer-clad elite who pressed against mahogany walls in barely controlled terror. Her movement through the panicked throng possessed a quality of quiet confidence that seemed to part the crowd without effort, her calm demeanor creating ripples of stillness in the frantic energy that had consumed the auction house since Ivory Prince's collapse. Unlike the elegantly dressed bidders, whose clothing spoke of boardrooms and country clubs, she wore garments that bore the honest marks of actual labor, fabric softened by use rather than designed for display. Her hands, visible as she moved closer to the restricted area where the stallion fought for stability, carried the calluses of someone who earned survival through physical work rather than financial manipulation, fingers that understood tools and earth, and the honest exchange of effort for sustenance. The contrast between her weathered practicality and their polished privilege created an almost mystical quality, as if someone from a different century had stepped into their modern temple of commerce. Her eyes remained fixed on Ivory Prince, with an intensity that transcended the sympathetic concern shown by even the most experienced horseman present, her gaze carrying knowledge that seemed to pierce through the surface of his suffering to something deeper and more fundamental. While others saw a valuable animal in medical crisis, she observed with the focused attention of someone reading a language written in breath and movement, in the subtle communications that passed between species when artificial barriers dissolved. The way she studied his labored breathing, the angle of his ears, the tremor in his powerful frame, suggested understanding that reached beyond veterinary training into realms where intuition met ancient wisdom. Security personnel moved to intercept her approach toward the medical emergency, their practiced authority faltering when confronted by her unhurried certainty. She possessed none of the aggressive entitlement displayed by the wealthy bidders, yet something in her bearing made trained guards hesitate rather than immediately escort her away from the restricted area. Dr. Hartman, overwhelmed by the stallion's deteriorating condition and desperate for any assistance that might save his life, noticed the woman's presence and felt something shift in the atmosphere of crisis that had consumed them all. The auction house, that moments ago had echoed with panic, now seemed to hold its breath as this stranger in simple clothing drew closer to where Ivory Prince struggled against whatever force was claiming him. Her presence created a pocket of calm in the storm of fear and confusion. Though none could explain why her arrival felt significant rather than intrusive, the assembled elite found themselves watching her approach with fascination, born of witnessing something their experience couldn't categorize, their usual certainties challenged by the quiet authority she carried without announcement or explanation. The moment when everything would shift from desperation to possibility arrived not with fanfare, but with the quiet authority of someone who understood that some crises required wisdom rather than wealth to resolve. The woman reached the velvet barrier separating the crowd from the medical emergency, her presence finally registering with security personnel who moved with practiced efficiency to intercept what they assumed was another curious onlooker, drawn by morbid fascination. Her voice carried an unusual quality as she spoke quietly to the guards, words that remained inaudible to the crowd straining to hear above their own nervous chatter, but possessed sufficient gravity to make trained professionals pause mid-stride. Something in her manner gave the guards pause, a confidence that suggested expertise rather than presumption, causing them to hesitate rather than immediately escort her away from the restricted area where Ivory Prince continued his desperate struggle against whatever force was claiming him. She didn't possess the aggressive entitlement that characterized the wealthy bidders, nor did she display the nervous deference most civilians showed when confronted by authority. Instead, she carried herself with the quiet certainty of someone who belonged exactly where she stood, whose presence represented solution rather than complication. Dr. Hartman, overwhelmed by the stallion's deteriorating condition and watching her medical interventions fail against symptoms she couldn't properly diagnose, noticed the woman's approach with the desperate awareness of someone running out of options. The veterinarian's years of training had prepared her for most equine emergencies, but Ivory Prince's crisis defied conventional understanding, his vital signs indicating distress that seemed to originate from something beyond physical illness. Her equipment lay scattered across marble floors, monitors showing readings that made no medical sense, while the magnificent stallion continued his decline despite every pharmaceutical intervention in her arsenal. The split-second decision that would change everything about this night came when Dr. Hartman met the woman's eyes across the chaos, recognizing something in that gaze that spoke of knowledge she herself lacked. Professional pride warred with desperate necessity as the veterinarian weighed protocol against the reality that her expertise was proving inadequate against whatever was destroying the stallion before their eyes. The woman's calm presence created a pocket of stillness in the storm of panic, her focus entirely on Ivory Prince rather than the human drama surrounding his collapse. Security personnel found themselves caught between established procedure and something indefinable in the woman's bearing that suggested her intervention might represent hope rather than interference. The guards exchanged uncertain glances as they assessed a situation their training hadn't prepared them to handle, where standard crowd control protocols seemed inadequate against the gravity of what was unfolding. Marcus watched from his position at the podium, his family's reputation hanging in the balance as he witnessed his carefully orchestrated evening transform into something beyond his control or understanding. The assembled elite pressed closer, despite their fear, drawn by the magnetic quality of witnessing something that transcended their usual experience of purchasing solutions to problems. The woman's simple clothing and weathered hands marked her as fundamentally different from their world of privilege, yet her presence carried authority that money couldn't buy and desperation couldn't counterfeit, suggesting that salvation sometimes arrived in forms that defied expectation or explanation. The miracle that would restore faith in something beyond material wealth began with the simple act of trust. As Dr. Hartman stepped aside and allowed the mysterious woman to approach Ivory Prince, her decision born from desperation transformed into intuitive recognition that conventional medicine had reached its limits. The woman moved with deliberate grace that seemed to slow time itself, her approach carrying none of the urgency that had characterized every other intervention, but instead embodying the patient certainty of someone who understood that healing required presence rather than haste. She knelt beside the struggling stallion without fear or hesitation, her weathered hands moving toward his trembling form with the confidence of someone who had navigated such moments of crisis before. Her touch began as whispered contact across his sweat-darkened coat, fingers moving with practiced precision that spoke of knowledge acquired through years of communion with creatures in distress. She felt for something the others had missed, her hands reading the language written in muscle tension and nervous tremors, while she murmured words too soft for the crowd to hear but somehow audible to the suffering animal, whose ears twitched toward her voice. The sounds she made weren't the clinical commands of traditional training, but something more ancient, more fundamental, as if she spoke in frequencies that bypassed conscious thought to reach directly into the stallion's soul. The auction house fell into unusual quiet, as even the most skeptical observers recognized that something significant was happening, though none could explain the sudden change in atmosphere that accompanied her presence, like morning mist settling over troubled waters. The frantic energy that had consumed the elegant space began to dissipate, replaced by something approaching reverence as witnesses found themselves holding their breath in collective awareness that they were observing something beyond their understanding or experience. Crystal chandeliers continued casting rainbow prisms across the scene, but the light itself seemed transformed, softer somehow, as if illuminating something sacred rather than commercial. Ivory Prince's labored breathing began to steady under her touch, his massive chest expanding and contracting with gradually increasing rhythm as whatever force had been claiming him seemed to loosen its grip. His panic-stricken eyes, which moments ago had rolled white with terror and confusion, slowly focused on her face with something approaching recognition, as if seeing not a stranger, but someone whose presence carried memories of safety and understanding. The tremors that had racked his powerful frame began to subside, muscles relaxing under her gentle ministrations that seemed to communicate directly with his nervous system. Her hands moved with increasing confidence across his neck and shoulders, finding pressure points that responded to her touch with visible relief as tension drained from areas that had been locked in spasms of distress. The foam at the corners of his mouth began to clear while his breathing deepened into something approaching normal respiratory patterns, each improvement marking another step back from whatever abyss had been claiming him. The assembled elite watched in stunned silence as their most valuable asset transformed from dying legend into living testament to the power of connection that transcended every barrier their wealth had constructed between themselves and the natural world. The revelation that would forever change how healing was understood began to unfold through touch that seemed to bridge centuries of forgotten wisdom. As the woman's fingers located specific pressure points along Ivory Prince's neck and shoulder, with the precision of someone reading an ancient map written in flesh and bone, her hands moved across his massive frame, like water finding its natural course, each contact point responding to her touch with visible relief that seemed to flow through his body in waves of release that modern science couldn't explain but couldn't deny. The stallion's breathing deepened with each gentle manipulation, his dark eyes clearing from confusion to something approaching peace as whatever had been tormenting him began to dissolve under her ministrations. Dr. Hartman watched in fascination as techniques she had never encountered in decades of veterinary training proved more effective than her sophisticated equipment and carefully calculated pharmaceutical interventions. The woman's methods seemed almost mystical to observers who had spent lifetimes believing that healing required technology and chemical compounds rather than the simple application of understanding that transcended formal education. Her fingers traced patterns along the stallion's musculature that followed no anatomical chart the veterinarian recognized, yet produced results that her most advanced treatments had failed to achieve, despite their scientific foundation and expensive precision. Whispers began circulating through the crowd as people strained to identify this mysterious figure whose simple presence had transformed a medical emergency into something approaching miracle, their voices carrying the urgent curiosity of those witnessing something that challenged every assumption they held about the nature of expertise and authority. Oil executives leaned toward their companions with questions that revealed how little their vast fortunes had taught them about the world beyond their boardrooms, while European collectors found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew about the relationship between human knowledge and equine wellness. The woman's focus remained entirely on Ivory Prince, rather than the human drama surrounding them, her concentration so complete that she seemed unaware of the hundreds of eyes watching her every movement with fascination born of witnessing something their experience couldn't categorize or explain. Her weathered hands continued their patient work across his coat, finding areas of tension that released under her touch like locks opening to keys that had been lost for generations, each success marking another step in his transformation from suffering creature to the magnificent stallion he had been bred to become. The auction house itself seemed to hold its breath as Ivory Prince's recovery continued with speed that defied medical understanding, his powerful frame regaining the regal bearing that had made him the evening's star attraction. The foam at his mouth had completely cleared, while his breathing settled into the deep, steady rhythm of an animal at peace rather than in crisis, his transformation so complete that those who had witnessed his collapse could barely reconcile the dying creature with the magnificent beast now standing tall beneath the crystal chandeliers. Her methods combined ancient wisdom with intuitive understanding that seemed to communicate directly with the stallion's nervous system, bypassing the rational mind to reach something deeper and more fundamental than conscious thought. Each gentle pressure, each whispered sound, each moment of patient contact built upon the last to create healing that transcended the boundaries between species and touched the very essence of what connected all living things in ways that wealth could never purchase or prestige could never command. The moment when despair transformed into something approaching miracle continued to unfold as Ivory Prince responded to the woman's care with increasing trust, his massive frame surrendering defenses that had been erected through years of misunderstanding and mishandling by those who saw strength as something to be conquered rather than honored. His breathing normalized with each gentle ministration, the labored gasps that had filled the auction house with sounds of suffering replaced by deep, steady inhalations that spoke of a nervous system learning to find peace after prolonged crisis. The stallion's strength returned gradually under her skilled touch, not with the aggressive energy of forced recovery, but with the patient rebuilding of something that had been fractured at its very foundation. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the magnificent creature that moments ago had seemed poised on the threshold of death began to recover with remarkable speed that challenged every assumption they held about the nature of healing and the timeline of medical intervention. His white coat, which had darkened with the unhealthy sheen of distress and desperate perspiration, gradually returned to its natural luminous beauty as whatever poison had been coursing through his system dissipated under her patient ministrations. The transformation occurred in layers, each moment of contact building upon the last, to restore not just physical vitality, but something deeper and more fundamental that had been damaged long before his collapse. Her methods combined traditional techniques with intuitive understanding that transcended formal training, each movement calculated to restore not just physical health, but emotional equilibrium to an animal that had clearly experienced profound trauma, extending far beyond this evening's crisis. The way her fingers found specific points along his neck and shoulders suggested knowledge that bridged ancient wisdom with immediate necessity, healing that addressed root causes rather than merely treating symptoms. Her presence seemed to communicate safety in a language that required no words, only the patient application of touch that respected his dignity while acknowledging his pain. Marcus found himself torn between relief at the stallion's miraculous recovery and growing concern about the implications of this unexpected intervention for his carefully planned auction, his mind racing to calculate how this dramatic turn of events would affect not just tonight's sale, but his family's reputation in the exclusive world of elite horse trading. The evening that was supposed to showcase the Whitmore name as the pinnacle of equestrian commerce had become something entirely different, a demonstration that true expertise sometimes arrived in forms that defied expectation or explanation. His silver hair caught the light as he struggled to maintain composure while witnessing the systematic unraveling of everything he thought he understood about the relationship between value and knowledge. Dr. Hartman stood transfixed as her years of veterinary education proved inadequate preparation for witnessing healing that operated according to principles she had never encountered in any medical textbook or pharmaceutical manual. The woman's methods challenged every assumption the veterinarian held about the proper protocols for emergency intervention, yet produced results that her most sophisticated equipment had failed to achieve despite its technological superiority and scientific foundation. Each gentle pressure point, each whispered sound, each moment of patient contact seemed to unlock doors in the stallion's nervous system that modern medicine hadn't even known existed, creating pathways to recovery that bypassed rational understanding to reach something far more fundamental than conscious thought. The truth that would rewrite the evening's meaning began to surface through fragments of memory carried by the oldest horsemen present. Men whose weathered faces suddenly brightened with recognition as scattered pieces of legend coalesced into the reality standing before them in simple denim and worn boots. The whispered name that passed through the crowd carried weight accumulated over decades of storytelling, each repetition adding layers of amazement as people recalled tales their fathers had shared about healers who worked with animals in ways that modern veterinary science struggled to explain or accept. These were stories that had been relegated to folklore, dismissed as exaggeration born of simpler times when mystery was permitted to exist alongside knowledge. Her identity emerged slowly through the collective memory of those who remembered when horse healing was still considered an art rather than merely a science, when certain individuals possessed gifts that bridged the gap between human understanding and equine communication in ways that transcended formal training. The name Elena Blackwater began to circulate among the gathered elite, carrying with it legends of miraculous recoveries that had seemed more myth than reality until this moment when they witnessed her methods firsthand. Oil executives leaned toward their companions, seeking explanation for stories they had never heard, while European collectors found themselves reconsidering family histories that had always included whispered references to healers whose abilities defied rational explanation. The woman herself remained focused entirely on ivory prints, her concentration so complete that the growing recognition surrounding her identity seemed as distant as stars to someone working by lamplight. Her weathered hands continued their patient ministrations across his powerful frame, each touch calculated to restore not just physical vitality, but the deeper equilibrium that connected breath to spirit, muscle to memory. She worked with the unhurried certainty of someone who understood that true healing required presence rather than haste, patience rather than pressure. Ivory Prince's recovery continued to astound everyone present as he regained not just physical stability, but the regal bearing that had made him the evening's star attraction. His transformation marking each moment with visible progress that seemed to accelerate under her skilled touch. His breathing had settled into the deep, steady rhythm of an animal at peace, while his dark eyes cleared from confusion to something approaching serenity as whatever trauma had triggered his collapse dissolved under her patient ministrations. The foam that had marked his distress disappeared completely, replaced by the healthy moisture of normal equine respiration. Dr. Hartman found herself witnessing healing that operated according to principles she had never encountered in decades of veterinary practice. Watching techniques that seemed to communicate directly with the stallion's nervous system through pathways that bypassed conscious thought to reach something far more fundamental. The veterinarian's sophisticated equipment lay forgotten on marble floors as she observed methods that achieved results her pharmaceutical interventions had failed to produce, despite their scientific foundation and technological precision. Marcus watched from his position at the podium as his carefully orchestrated auction transformed into something beyond his understanding or control. The evening's commercial purpose, overshadowed by the demonstration of healing that touched every witness with its quiet power. The Whitmore family's reputation for managing elite transactions now seemed secondary to the privilege of hosting something that transcended mere commerce, to become testimony to connections that wealth could never purchase or prestige could never command. The moment when everything broken was made whole arrived not with fanfare, but with the simple grace of Ivory Prince, rising to his full magnificent height, his 18 hands of pure power restored to the regal bearing that had made him the evening's treasured centerpiece before crisis transformed him into something fragile and mortal. His white coat gleamed with renewed health under the crystal chandeliers, each hair catching and reflecting light with the luminous quality that spoke of vitality coursing through his powerful frame once again. The transformation was complete, yet somehow miraculous, as if witnessing resurrection itself unfold in the marble sanctuary, where wealth had gathered to acquire beauty, but instead found themselves observing the restoration of something far more precious than ownership could ever encompass. The woman stepped back slowly from her patient, her weathered hands falling to her sides, with the quiet satisfaction of work completed according to principles that transcended monetary value or social recognition. Her movement carried the deliberate grace of someone who understood that healing required knowing not just when to act, but when to allow space for recovery to establish its own rhythm. The connection between them remained visible to everyone present in the way Ivory Prince followed her retreat with gentle attention, his dark eyes tracking her movement with devotion that spoke of bonds forged through trust rather than dominance, through understanding rather than possession. The auction house found itself transformed from a place of commerce into something approaching sacred space, where the demonstration of healing had touched even the most hardened hearts among the wealthy bidders who had arrived expecting to witness transactions, but instead found themselves observing miracles. The atmosphere itself had shifted, the competitive energy that had characterized the early evening replaced by something deeper and more fundamental, as if the building's very purpose had been sanctified by events that transcended its commercial foundation. Crystal light seemed softer now, casting illumination that revealed not just monetary value, but the intrinsic worth of connection between species that money could never purchase or possession could never contain. Marcus gripped the podium with hands that had lost their steady confidence, his silver hair catching light that revealed the weight of decisions pressing against his consciousness like storm clouds gathering on clear horizons. The evening that was supposed to cement his family's legacy through the sale of exceptional bloodstock had become something entirely different, a reckoning that would define not just this night, but the future trajectory of everything the Whitmore name represented in the exclusive world of elite equestrian commerce. His carefully orchestrated auction had dissolved into demonstration that true value sometimes arrived in forms that defied expectation, that healing could be more precious than ownership, that wisdom sometimes wore work clothes rather than designer suits. The assembled elite found themselves witnessing something that challenged every assumption they held about the relationship between wealth and worth, between possession and connection, between the power of money and the greater power of understanding that bridged the spaces between human ambition and natural grace. Ivory Prince stood magnificent and whole, his presence now radiating the quiet dignity of something that had been broken and lovingly restored, not through technology or pharmaceutical intervention, but through the patient application of knowledge that honored rather than conquered, that healed rather than merely treated symptoms of deeper trauma that wealth had been powerless to prevent or cure. The moment when all deceptions crumbled and truth emerged, like dawn breaking over a landscape forever changed, arrived not through dramatic revelation, but through the quiet acknowledgement of connections that had been hidden beneath decades of carefully constructed lies and willful forgetting. Elena Blackwater's presence in the auction house wasn't coincidence, but homecoming. Her weathered hands carrying memories of a foal born 20 years ago in stables that no longer existed, raised with techniques that modern commerce had forgotten in its rush toward profit over partnership. Ivory Prince wasn't just any stallion, but the culmination of bloodlines she had helped nurture, a living testament to breeding practices that honored the animal's spirit rather than merely exploiting its genetic potential for financial gain. The auction took an unexpected turn as understanding rippled through the crowd like stones cast into still water, each recognition creating wider circles of comprehension that transformed the evening's purpose from financial transaction to something deeper and more meaningful than simple exchange of money for possession. Marcus found himself confronting the reality that his family's most prestigious offering had been acquired through methods that severed the stallion from everything that had made him magnificent, that the trauma Elena had just healed was directly connected to his removal from the only home he had ever known. The magnificent creature's collapse hadn't been medical emergency, but emotional breakdown, his body expressing grief that his spirit couldn't contain. Bidders found themselves reconsidering their motivations as they witnessed the profound bond between healer and horse that transcended ownership or commerce, their competitive instincts dissolving in the face of connection that revealed the limitations of possession as a path to meaningful relationship with such creatures. Oil executives and European royalty alike stood humbled by the demonstration that true partnership required understanding rather than dominance, patience rather than pressure, respect rather than mere financial investment. Their paddle numbers seemed suddenly meaningless, reduced to crude instruments in a game whose rules had fundamentally changed. Elena's quiet wisdom and extraordinary gift became the evening's true revelation, overshadowing even the magnificent stallion that had brought everyone together but serving to illuminate the deeper truths about what made such creatures truly valuable. Her presence transformed the auction house from temple of commerce into classroom where the assembled elite received education that no amount of money could purchase, where ancient knowledge met modern ignorance and revealed the poverty that existed beneath even the greatest material wealth. She had come not to disrupt their evening, but to restore what had been broken, to heal not just a suffering animal, but the fractured understanding that had made his suffering inevitable. The woman who had arrived in simple clothing and departed without fanfare left behind an auction house full of people forever changed by witnessing healing that operated according to principles their world had forgotten, where connection mattered more than possession, where wisdom wore work clothes rather than designer suits. Ivory Prince stood magnificent and whole, his white coat gleaming, not just with physical health, but with the restored dignity of a creature returned to understanding that honored his nature rather than exploiting it. Marcus faced the choice that would define his family's legacy, whether to continue the practices that had created tonight's crisis, or to learn from the woman whose gift had revealed the difference between owning horses and truly knowing them, between conducting auctions and facilitating partnerships that honored both human ambition and equine magnificence. The transformation that had begun with chaos and crisis reached its gentle conclusion as the auction house slowly emptied, leaving behind people fundamentally changed by witnessing something that challenged every assumption they had held about value, connection, and the mysterious bonds that exist between humans and animals when artificial barriers dissolve in the presence of genuine understanding. The marble floors that had echoed with panic now reflected only quiet footsteps as bidders departed in contemplative silence, their conversations subdued by the weight of having observed healing that operated according to principles their world had forgotten. Each departing figure carried with them memories that would reshape their understanding of what it meant to truly possess something of value, their competitive instincts forever altered by the demonstration that some connections transcended commerce entirely. Ivory Prince stood healthy and magnificent in the center ring, his white coat gleaming with restored vitality, that spoke of more than physical recovery, but of spirit renewed through methods that combined ancient wisdom with genuine compassion. His dark eyes held the calm intelligence that had made him legendary, no longer clouded by the trauma that had nearly claimed his life, but clear with the dignity of a creature whose suffering had been acknowledged and honored, rather than merely treated as inconvenience. The stallion's breathing came deep and steady, his powerful frame radiating the quiet confidence of something that had been broken and lovingly restored to wholeness. Elena Blackwater had disappeared as quietly as she had arrived, her simple presence leaving no trace except in the hearts of those who had witnessed her gift, and the life she had saved through patient application of knowledge that honored rather than conquered. Her weathered hands had touched not just a suffering animal, but the collective consciousness of an elite gathering, revealing the poverty that existed beneath even the greatest material wealth when connection was severed from commerce, when possession replaced partnership as the foundation of human relationship with the natural world. Marcus contemplated the evening's events from his position behind the podium that had once represented authority, but now seemed merely furniture in a space transformed by forces beyond his control or understanding. The Whitmore family legacy would forever be marked by this night, when their most prestigious auction became demonstration that true value sometimes arrived in forms that defied expectation, that healing could be more precious than ownership, that wisdom sometimes wore work clothes rather than designer suits. His carefully constructed world of elite transactions had been forever changed by witnessing the difference between acquiring horses and truly knowing them. The memory of miraculous healing lingered in the minds of all who witnessed it, a reminder that some gifts cannot be purchased, some connections transcend the boundaries of species and commerce, and some moments of grace arrive precisely when they are most needed to restore faith in the possibility of genuine healing in a world obsessed with possession rather than partnership. The story ended not with transaction completed, but with understanding transformed, leaving behind the promise that ancient wisdom still existed for those willing to recognize it when it appeared in unexpected forms. If this story of unexpected healing and the profound bond between Elena and Ivory Prince touched your heart, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about both wild and domestic horses. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.